وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. And the reason for that is because there's an important concept regarding the fact that the world works through, or people work the world through the paradigms they believe in. What's a paradigm? A paradigm is like the way you see the world, okay? So let me ask you this. If I believe that all the material in nature, all of the different things that we see in nature are in reality without a soul, they are just biological organisms. There is no day of judgment. There is no sense of accountability for how I use those items. I ask you, if I have this outlook towards nature or towards material in general, is that the same, or will it be the same as a person who sees the different things of nature and in nature as connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Would the same practices that are engaged in by the first be engaged in as well by the second? Will not their outlook on the world make it so that the way they design the tools that they think people should use, they impact that? And beyond that is another important aspect I want people to consider when they're thinking about technology. And that is a question, again, one higher up. Is that, how are we seeing the human being in and of itself? How are we considering the human being to be? Why is this an important question? Because we are considering the use of tools developed by this human being. So if this human being, again, the way he sees the world or the way she sees the world, if they see themselves as an accidental result of a probabilistic event, if they see themselves like this, and they don't believe in the fact that there's going to be an accountability, there's going to be a resurrection, they don't believe in that, will the motivation they have for doing things be the same as if it were for a person who thinks that there's a day of judgment, that Allah created him, that he has a purpose in life, that she is accountable for what she does? Does that not also impact the direction of the tool that's being made? There are three sciences that are really important when you want to consider something like this, okay? And I'm going to relate them to a statement from Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. And I'm going to end my very high-level abstract talk on this, that it's almost like a calling card, that everything needs to know where it came from, where it is, and where it's going, okay? And in the contemporary, I guess you could say, educational system, they break those topics down in fascinating. They call them, one of them would be anthropology, the other one would be ontology, and the third would be eschatology, okay? Anthropology, ontology, and eschatology. What are those dealing with? In order to elaborate on that, I'm going to mention a statement from Imam Ali alayhi salam, where he says that Rahimallah imra'an arafa min ain wa fi ain وَإِلَىٰ أَيْنَ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mercy, meaning that the mercy of Allah will be on the person who knows where they come from, where they are, and where they're going. If you want to think a little deeply about this statement, it's not an invitation for us just to consider where I came from. I came from Iran, or I came from Pakistan, or I came from another country. That's not what it's really asking. What it's asking is, where is my essence, and what is my essence? And that is a question for what the modern science would consider anthropology. That's where they try to deal with the questions like this. Where did the human being start from? How did it develop? And when you observe that through history, you come to know certain things about the way humans are. That's where we came from. Where we are is ontology. If I see the world as connected through a pattern of causality, that Allah has an impact on everything, that I am responsible for the way I interact with this universe, with this world, that is going to impact the way I treat it and the way I deal with it. Versus if I just see this world as a material, dead bundle of resources that I can just extract and use, I'm going to develop different technologies because of that. What am I trying to get at? And the final one, obviously, is where we're going is eschatology, is that we know that we are headed towards a reality, that we are on a journey, that death is part of that journey. That's what we know. But if I think that life is only what we have in this world, and I don't have to worry about a hereafter, how does that change the way I do things? So now I ask a more relevant question, just to keep this on your minds. With the introduction that I gave, how likely, and just keep this on your minds, and I'm going to end on this question, is how likely do you think it is that the technologies that we use right now today are without a direction or are without a bias? Think about that. I thank you all for your attention. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much, Sheikh Naveed, for your insightful talk. Inshallah, we will all benefit from the knowledge you have shared with us. Next, I would like to introduce our next scholar, Sayyid Sulaiman Ali Hassan, and welcome him to the podium. Sayyid Sulaiman Hassan was born in Western New York. While in high school, he studied and graduated with distinction from the Islamic Seminary in Medina, New York. He then pursued a degree in business administration at the University of Buffalo, from which he earned a Bachelor's of Science at the age of 18. Upon graduation, he proceeded from there to the Islamic Seminary of Qum, Iran, where he was privileged to study under world-renowned scholars specializing in Islamic law, history, and Arabic literature. He served as a researcher with the Ahl-Bayt Institute, affiliated with the Office of Ayatollah Sistani, and was a fellow at the Zekher Institute for Advanced Legal Studies for over 4 years. After returning to the United States, Sayyid Sulaiman has served as religious director at the Beit al-Ilm Academy and as president of the Ahl-Bayt Islamic Seminary in Streamwood, Illinois. He currently serves as a scholar of Imam al-Asr in Alexandria, Virginia. He lectures widely in both academic and masjid settings and is an active participant in interfaith and interfaith outreach. Sayyid Sulaiman also holds a PhD in Near Eastern Studies from the University of Chicago. Salawat.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Sheikh Naveed, Sheikh Rizwani, dear brothers and sisters, I begin by offering my condolences to all of you. We are still in a period of mourning at an unjust war, and many very pure and innocent martyrs, our leaders, our ulama, and those devoted members of our community, and then innocent people who deserve to live a life of dignity and were so heartlessly oppressed, and many of them killed and injured. My condolences to the Imam of our time, to our ulama, to all of our mu'mineen, and my prayers that insha'Allah this injustice come to an end, and that we see a triumph of truth and of the just cause of the oppressed, insha'Allah. Sheikh Naveed actually gave a very eloquent and scholarly introduction. I had 3 points that I wanted to make, and the first point he has dealt with probably more eloquently than I could, so I'll just make a few comments and then mention the 2 other points I wanted to discuss, really to introduce our interactive session. And that is where the heart of our program, inshallah, will be. The first point, as Sheikh Naveed mentioned, and Jazakumullah for a very beautiful reminder and reflection on the hadith of Imam Ali, that may Allah's mercy be, or Allah's mercy is, on those who know where they are from and where they are and where they are going. The first point that I wanted to reiterate is that we should not think that technology is neutral, and that it was not developed with a set of values, and that it does not reinforce a set of values. And so we should always have a critical view of the effect that technology has. And I'm not saying that that means that we should, get a flip phone and remove ourselves from WhatsApp. There's many reasons why a person may want to do that, both in terms of surveillance and in terms of the harmful effects on our life. But for example, myself, if I wanted to do that, then I would not be able to perhaps fulfill many obligations that I have of silatul rahim, of connections and community with other people. So, if I have an elderly relative and I say, well, I think Telegram is safer than WhatsApp. I don't know if that actually is true, but hypothetically speaking. And they are not able to figure out that one app at the age of 70 or 80, and now, because of my ideology or my knowledge, which might be valid in itself, but then compared to the obligations and the relationships that I have, maybe it is something that I should not give too much importance to. Another example that is very relevant is, environmentalism is something that Muslims believe in. But sometimes we get caught up in environmentalism. We might say that, it's better not to have an event than to use disposable tablecloths and dishes and straws and all of this waste. We have an event in the masjid and there are bags and bags of garbage. That's true. If we can reduce waste, if we can eliminate waste, that is something that we should do. But the real damage to the environment is caused by these wars and the military-industrial complex. And so if I can have an event that pushes the needle one step forward in opposing war, raising awareness, maybe there's 5 trash bags full of trash, but that might be in service of the environment and not against it. That's what my point is, that remember that there are relative values that we should have. It's not just a simple statement that, well, there is surveillance, and there is personal and spiritual and social harm from technology. Be aware of what our values are, but also be aware of how they connect with other responsibilities that we have in our families and in our society. And let's not just get fixated on one element of our relationship with technology or with the environment or any other examples that you can think of. But we should be aware that it is not neutral. And it is not automatic progress. Sometimes, Muslims, they make that mistake. They say that, Muslims had discovered the process of blood circulation or certain discoveries in optics or something years before Europe. Maybe we did, maybe we didn't sometimes. There's debate. But the real point is that is assuming that there is a linear progress. That assumption is perhaps more dangerous than wondering whether Europe discovered it first or we discovered it first. Because those discoveries do not directly correlate to our salvation, And the lack of those discoveries don't send us to hell. They make life easier. They may be an obligation for us to learn and to study and to observe God's creation, and that is one way that we worship God, and it's one way that we honor God. كيف بدأ الخلق? That's something. سيروا في الأرض. فانظروا كيف بدأ الخلق. We should observe. But it is not true that there is linear progress. We are discovering certain things, and we are losing certain things. And we should be aware, at least, that we have to wonder, are we losing more than we are gaining? Sometimes people, they say that, I wouldn't want to live at any other time. I'm old enough to remember a time before internet. We used to go online, mapquest.com, and print out the directions. And before that, we actually, you younger kids, you probably can't imagine it. We'd actually have to pull out a map, kind of like this, and then even bigger than that. Let's see, maybe we should take that road. This looks like an interstate. I think, we lived. We got to our destinations, sometimes better than we do today with GPS. And people before our time, they didn't have the technology, and maybe they lived happier lives and more fulfilling lives and more close-knit lives than we do. So just let's not get confused and think that there is linear progress and we're better off. Maybe if we had lived 500 years ago, we would have lived a better life, a more pious life, a more tranquil life than today. Now, Allah created us today. He didn't create us 500 years ago. So don't try to build a time machine and Allah didn't make a mistake. You're in the right time, you're in the right place, but recognize the pros and cons. So far make sense? Second thing, this is more for parents. Those of you who might even remember a time before my pre-technology days when the dinosaurs roamed the earth. Some of us are old enough to remember before the dinosaurs. Don't just be defensive. Some of us, we see technology, we see that you're listening to, a tilawat of Quran, and then the ad that comes, astaghfirullah. And you just think that, oh my God, I have to have protections and I have to have oversight and, I just have to make my children fear the world. If your training and your upbringing is rooted in fear, then you will never be able to instill faith and confidence in your children. That has so many social harms. Sometimes they can then try to hide from us. Sometimes they can get alienated from us. Yes, believe it or not, I'm not easy to shock, but I get shocked sometimes at what exists online. And many of us, we are worried for the world that our children are going to inhabit. Many of us who have young children or maybe grandchildren, and we see their innocence, we want to preserve that innocence. And technology destroys innocence. I know 10-year-olds who are kind of already cynical and sarcastic. A 10-year-old should not understand sarcasm. That is not growing up. That is losing innocence. Eventually you learn that there is a place for sarcasm and for cynicism. Don't make your kids snarky and think it's cute. But because of that desire to preserve, we often then are only defensive. That, oh, no, this is bad, this is dangerous, you can't protect forever. We want to preserve the innocence, we want to protect it for as long as we can, but they're going to live in this real world. Even if you go, at one time people were saying you should go to like Dubai. I don't know how that's working out for people who are planning. Maybe people still want to move to Muscat. There's no heaven on earth. There's a place called Aden, the city in Yemen, but it's not Jannatu Adn. It's still not heaven on earth, not by a long shot. There is no place that you can be safe, even in Najaf, even in Qom. So you have to have a positive message that you give, and not just a defensive or a negative mention. Yes, be protective. You should have oversight. Don't rush to give your child a phone because all of their peers have it. Don't give in to the ease that, hey, you just use some screen time, I'm busy, and say that, well, I trust you, and therefore you can do what you want. No, it is important to be careful, to have oversight, but that is not going to be the solution. That's the second point. So the first point, as Sheikh Naveed said, and I just maybe reiterated, was that technology is not neutral. And the second point is that don't just be afraid and defensive, but be affirmative. Give your children a love of Islam and an idea of the beauty of Islam in terms of its ibadah, in terms of its community, but even in terms of its art. One of the things I love about this community is that, mashallah, you have so many young people who recite Hadith al-Kisa and poetry, and most importantly, Quran, with such passion and such beauty that, I feel like I should tell them, I don't want to give the speech, just continue reciting. And that would do much more for my heart and maybe give all of the listeners a little bit of a break, that you hear the words of Allah from a beautiful recitation rather than my imperfect thoughts from a less eloquent and a less beautiful voice. But this is something very beautiful. So Islam is encompassing, and also visual arts, also performative arts. These are things that our community should go. Inculcate that within your kids, and then they will be protected, because the universe that they are inhabited will be enchanted by wisdom, by faith, by beauty. What they see and what they hear and what they think about, it's not going to be sports, and it's not going to be entertainment, and it's not going to be that danger is there in the world, but you will be protected. Last point that I wanted to make is that our culture often focuses on the means and not on the end. So right now there's a campaign, End the War. And yeah, that's a good slogan, kalimatu haqq, but sometimes yuradu biha batil. Ending the war is not the point. Peace is not the point. Justice is the point. And there should be peace, but it should be rooted in justice. Don't just say, oh, well, are you going to go for ceasefire talks? Are you going to go for a negotiation? I'm not talking about any particular instance. I'm talking in general. Stability is only lasting if it is rooted in justice. Society condemns terrorism, but it doesn't ask, why is this person engaging in such extreme acts? Terrorism is never justified. Islam teaches us before any other political ideology or any other religion that whatever your cause and whatever your grievance is, you must always act with honor and with justice. If there's one thing we learn from Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa from Fatima al-Zahra, from Amir al-Mu'minin, from Imam Hassan, from Imam Hussein, that is the message. But there still is a question that somebody is engaging in terrorism because they want to steal somebody's land, and somebody is engaging in terrorism because they want to protect their land. We say that regardless of your cause, you have to act with honor and with justice, but those two are not the same. And so you can't just say war on terrorism. Say a war on injustice, and then an opposition to unjust means to acquire just ends. Does that make sense? Our society focuses on the means, the instrument, war and peace. A ceasefire is always good, regardless if it is fair or unfair. No, it's not true. War is disliked, but sometimes it is necessary. Sometimes, عَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. It's needed. It's required. Similarly, with so many other things in life, technology is the same way. It is an instrument. And so the final point that I want to make is, what are the ends? What are the goals that we live our life for? The most successful marriage is not one where you are compatible with your spouse. Especially for our young children who are not married and looking for marriage, and like, is this the right person? Is this not the right person? How would I know if I don't talk to them 70 times over the course of, so many years? And people who see Muslims, they're like, wait a minute, you didn't have a relationship for 5 years and you got married? How did you do? The most important attribute in a successful marriage is if you have the same goals. You don't have to speak the same language. I know people who don't speak the same language who got married. Not too many, but I have at least one, and maybe I can say two examples. Tunisian and Azerbaijani. And both of them spoke a little bit of Farsi, but not necessarily a common language. Very healthy marriage. They had the same goals. Nowadays you have Google Translate, and I can read messages in many languages. Back then they didn't have that. If you share goals, doesn't matter if you're a morning person, the other person's an evening person. If you like sports, they hate sports. If you are an introvert, they are an extrovert. If you are a saver and they are a spender, almost becomes irrelevant. If your goals are aligned, that's the power and the importance of the ends and the goals. And for many people, what I'm saying, it doesn't compute. It doesn't make sense. Those of you who have experienced those kinds of relationships in your own life, in your elders' lives, then you can understand that. You can deal with a lot of incompatibility if your ideals and your goals are closely aligned. And if your ideals are not closely aligned, then a slight difference, oh my God, how can I live with this? So technology also, it's a means. Be critical of it, but the important thing is, what are your goals? What are your ideals? And I focus there. And then you will see where and when to use that means that you have at your disposal, inshallah, in the best possible way. But the focus should be on the ends. I know that message was a little bit broader than just dealing with technology, because I think those other issues are relevant for us to think about. And in any case, marriage and our relationships and our families and our goals, they are all important for us. But specifically when it comes to technology, just remember that it is a means. It was created by a society because of its priorities, and it will be utilized by different people in society according to what their goals are. What are our goals as a community? That is something that we need to think about, and we have much to contemplate from our religious sources, from our Prophet, from our Imams. And we don't have to have perfect answers. وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Allah will guide you. You just make your best effort. Don't try to be clever. Try to be humble and try to be wise. And Allah will grant you the direction of what you need to do. But think about those ends before you think about the means. Wassalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah khair, Sayyid Sulaiman, for this inspiring talk and for sharing your thoughts on this very important topic. Our next part of the program will be a panel discussion with our esteemed scholars and our moderator, Sister Idara-e-Jaferia, who will be leading the discussion with questions concerning our topic.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Assalamu alaikum, respected community members, Sayyid Sulaiman and Sheikh Naveed. Thank you so much for joining us today for this important topic and workshop titled Protecting Our Minds, Islam, Technology, and Digital Wellbeing. I'd like to start off by thanking the Idara for hosting this program, to the board, and specifically Dr. Yemel for your coordination and passion in helping me put this together. So we've gotten a chance to hear a bit from both of our respected panelists, and now I'd like to take a deep dive into the interactive portion of today's session. In the increasingly expanding digital era, media usage among Muslim communities has become unavoidably a necessity. Technology and screens are evolving rapidly and dominate our environment. We are exposed to influences that shape our daily lives. And as Sister Batul mentioned earlier, they shape our thoughts, our habits, and our spiritual states. And at times it becomes almost overwhelming to keep up with all the gadgets and the digital devices that are surrounding us. And as most of us know, Islam encourages anything that enhances the quality of life as long as it's within pure intentions and good faith. Like everything in this world, technology can be used for both good and the bad. And thus our duty, and it's not neutral, and thus it's our duty to use resources wisely and remember that our mind is our amana from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We gather today communally in hopes to attain knowledge, to strengthen our filter and digital inputs, and remember to be intentional with our media consumption. So I'd like to scratch the surface a little bit and discuss the various forms of digital media, conscious media consumption, digital distractions, deceptions, navigating the digital realm in alignment with Islamic morals, and then we will end with some practical tools that we can apply in our daily lives. Because digital well-being, it does not just inform us, it forms us, whatever we're taking in. So let's pause for a second, and this is a rhetorical question for the crowd, and no judgments. how many hours do you think you spend in a day using technology for digital media usage? This is a little bit of self-reflection. And so as you guys are thinking, I'm going to share what digital media actually entails. Digital media includes any data formatted for electronic distribution, primarily through the internet, encompassing text, videos, audio, graphics, and interactive content. Some examples include social media, so Instagram, X, formerly known as Twitter, Meta, formerly known as Facebook, and the aunties and uncles' most favorite, WhatsApp. Streaming services, YouTube, Spotify, websites, ebooks, podcasts, video games, webinars, including and not limited to digital art and photography. So now that I've listed all of those things out, I want you guys to all think again, how much time do you spend consuming digital media, knowing that all of that encompasses digital media? The daily average screen time for an adult is 7 hours, 3.5 which are spent on your phone, 5+ which are spent doing work or on your phone, and the average amount of hours spent for Gen Z is 9 hours on their phone, which is almost the entire wake window. So that's how much digital media consumption we have. And now with the AI and several other things, technology is all around us. I think Sheikh Naveed and Sayyid Suleiman did a fantastic job already jumping into the topic and sharing their insights. And so I'm trying to filter these questions that I had already put together for interactive discussion, because a lot of them have been answered already. But I'll start with the first one regarding digital distractions for elders. So elders such as grandparents in our community, aunties, uncles, not to call you guys out, but are increasingly using Facebook or Meta and other social platforms, and this pulls them away from socialization amongst families and communities, leading to social isolation. So, and elders enter into a virtual world where they're no longer in touch or active with people around them. And so the question that I pose is that our faith teaches us to respect our parents and our elders. How can our faith guide us for us to advise our elders in the community about screen health and social media platforms in a respectful manner? Whichever. Bismillah.
So then, inshallah, you can add your insights, inshallah. That's an important question. One thing that I've noticed is that some of our elderly community members, because they, for mobility reasons or health reasons or whatever other reasons, they may be spending a lot more time online, listening to majalis or lectures or messages that are passed on that maybe 20 years ago they would have been surrounded by family, or they would have been coming to the center even with the difficulty, and that's become a reality. But many of those people, they are not raised with that technology, so they don't realize how to distinguish from what is accurate and what is inaccurate. They don't always realize the way that the algorithms bring certain messages forward. And so it can create maybe a very narrow channel of information about religion. I do know some families where they're struggling now with an elderly relative, a mother or a father, that has become very strict and maybe even very harsh about the religious practice, because they're listening now to these majalis, and they don't realize, in a non-Muslim context, hopefully none of our families, where they talk about my relative has started listening to Fox News and now I don't recognize them. Well, alhamdulillah, I don't think we have that problem, but listening to too many majalis a day, especially if there's an algorithm deciding which ones that we are going to be listening to, it can have the same effect. But they're talking about salat and they're talking about Saum, so it's not as perceptible, it's not wrong, it's just that it's not balanced. And then especially now with current events, there's a lot of AI material, there's a lot of false material, and so sometimes you'll have that member of your community or relative forwarding that this happened, and you tell them, no, that didn't happen. This is not real. This poem is not from that person, this event did not even take place, that person did not say this thing. So it is a challenge. And inshallah, Sheikh Naveed will add maybe insight to this issue or to other issues that he has in mind. But I think it is important for us not to be passive and not to let our relatives or our community members just live online. human contact, and engagement about these factors can help inform them about things that they're not necessarily able to understand or process because they grew up and they lived in a time before some of these innovations of modern technology. And there was always propaganda in media, but it was never so sinister and so imperceptible as it is today. So, these are things that I can't cure, and we should not have. It should be a humble, it should be a loving, it should be a very human response. Not, sometimes we get impatient. You can't even figure out how to use this app, or that's not how you do it, or don't believe everything that you watch online. No, your gentle engagement should not make them feel like they are too old or unable to keep up with the world. It should reinforce their self-confidence and their dignity as an elder, as a relative. Human engagement. What are you watching online? I saw that too. I'm not quite sure that was accurate. I was a little confused by that myself. I asked somebody, I did some research and I found out this was AI. It's really hard to tell AI, even sometimes experts get confused. So see the same message, but, oh, come on. There's a different response. But have that engagement. And when it comes to religious messages, listen to some majalis together. Put on something that is a little bit of a variety. But when you are channeled in just one area, then you think about something. It's a good thing to think about, but it's not everything. So I hope that's related to what you were talking about.
And that was a very beautiful answer. Thank you, Sayyid. And just want to add a perspective from another angle, and that would be from my work in family therapy. And some of the advice that Sayyid gave on how to deal with the issue is very critical to follow it that way. And the reason is because the family itself is like a system, a living organism in and of itself, okay? And you know how they say some things are greater than the sum of its parts? That's how a family, and in research, that's the conclusion they came to, that is fundamentally different than dealing with something on your own. And there are different dynamics involved. And so taking that advice, practicing it, that is extremely important. Among the things that we can emphasize as well is also what Sayyid mentioned was the importance in letting people know that technology is not neutral. These apps have algorithms. These companies are based in certain countries. Those countries have interests. When those interests are under threat, those companies will conform to what they need to conform to in order to keep the narrative to their favor, right? This is something that the elders, and sometimes like we tell our parents that, look, the purpose of all this media is to make you depressed, so you lose your faith in what you believe in. And when you lose your faith and hope in what you believe in, you become, as they say in Farsi, sust. It's almost like you become weak, you become frail, easily manipulated, easily conquered. And that's what a lot of the goal of some of this media is to make that happen. So inshallah, how do we get that point across? Is through that respectful, open discussion with our parents. And just like how we need to have an active, engaging relationship with our children in order to have a positive effect on their lives, likewise, with our parents, we also have to try to have some form of active relationship, engage with them in their lives, see what their interests are, just like you would ask your child, what are your interests, what are you reading, what's going on. It would kind of have to also have that approach with your parents as well, inshallah. So these are just some general ideas that came to mind.
Thank you. So respectful but passive with elders, and then engaging them respectfully. So I have a large list, and I want to just nitpick them. So the next question is regarding gaming, which is very popular amongst our youth boys, and it can be highly addictive. And so the type of play is dominating their development and their mind, and it often promotes aggression, affecting socialization skills, and delaying their emotional maturity and beyond. Islam places a strong emphasis on the responsibilities of men in their role in families and communities. So what are some guidelines from the Islamic lens which we can offer to boys and young men to manage the addictive behavior? And what are the thoughts of Islamic practices that are engaging, that are fun and Islamic, that we can replace the gaming with? And I know that for parents, you might know the answer sometimes, but hearing it is a good reminder sometimes as well. I have 3 young boys, and so I may know this is what I have to do, but sometimes it's a good reminder to hear it.
Just very briefly, something what the sister said, it reminded me of a theory when you're dealing with younger boys in therapy. And what they usually say is that boys are addicted to quests. And, this is how their brains generally function. They have a quest that is like a mission, and they have to go on the mission and accomplish the mission. And that's why games are so attractive. And they play on this feeling, this need. And then what they do is they create the world to be so vast. They call it those open world games, where you can interact with literally anything. And so the slow substitution between the virtual world and the actual physical world. And so what they do is they spend all of that energy going after a quest, that mental energy in the game. And so when they're out of the game, they're disconnected, they're not motivated, they don't want to study, they don't want to try to get a career. Some of these gamers have these problems. I know, I used to be a gamer. So that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. So if we know now why they're so fascinated or captivated by games, then we can try to replicate that in some other form in a healthy way in a community. And like Scouts, there's a reason why the Boy Scouts were there, is so they could provide that outlet or that channel for these boys to express their that feeling or that drive that they have to complete a quest or to do something like an activity that has a defined goal that they have to work towards. And that's something that the Muslim centers can replicate, and that's why it makes it so important, so critical, and so essential that the youth portion, especially the younger generation, that aspect of a community's programming is one that should be particularly paid attention to and focused on. And so providing that atmosphere of Scouts over here in a community center, providing that atmosphere of a Big Brother type program where they do tasks like construction tasks, whatever other types of tasks, under the supervision of a guide who teaches them how to do something. These are ways and activities that can replace that gaming.
Fantastic. Okay, so it looks like there's going to be a Boy Scouts coming soon to Idara and a Girl Scouts, if anybody wants to take a lead on that initiative. Okay, so regarding guarding the heart and mind, social media can promote self-indulgent behavior with posting perfect selfies, perfect images, perfect vacations, perfect everything. And so the most recent materials you've bought. So what are some tools available in our faith that we can utilize to prevent this kind of behavior? And what does Islam say about focusing only on the self and self-satisfaction?
That's something that it's difficult for us to really conceive of before we address it. We have to conceive of the issue in a society where both our culture and in many cases our thinking is rooted in a egocentric worldview. So, for example, religious parents, they want to raise their children Islamically. And so they'll say identity is very important. But identity is also about the self. And in reality, we don't have an identity so much as we have an orientation and an affiliation. What I'm striving for is not to have an Islamic identity. Because then I might think, all right, the dress and, the way I talk, and that's about me. What I want to have is a submission to God. Our identity is Islam. Islam is to submit to God. Submitting to God is not an identity, it is an orientation, it is an affiliation. I am not the hero of the story of my own life. Inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mamati. What else do you have in life? Salati wa nusuki, your prayer and your ritual, because that's all, if I were to look at my resources, I would say my time, my money, my talents, my resources. The Quran very beautifully, it summarizes our existence according to the most important things. And the most important things you have are not your time and your money and those things that make you arrogant or self-centered. Salati wa nusuki. And then if you want to summarize the entirety, mahyaya wa mamati, your life and your death. All of that is oriented lillahi rabbil alameen. وَبِذَلِكَ أُمِرْتُ. That's what I've been commanded to do. وَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. I am the first who... So, you see, even we want to protect ourselves against a secular identity, against a godless worldview. Say, I want an Islamic identity. But that's wrong. I want an Islamic orientation, which is focused on God, not on myself. So to become an alim, or to become recognized. I've actually seen this. I don't know if you have this issue in other centers or not, but sometimes if people have been called, to recite Quran or to recite Noha, and then they don't get the opportunity, they feel like something has been taken from them. Nothing has been taken from you. You showed up, you prepared, you got your reward. If you had recited, maybe you would have felt some self-satisfaction. If you showed up and you were ready and you didn't have to actually do it, كَفَاللَّهُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ الْقِتَالِ. If you're doing it as a jihad, do you want to show up for battle and have to face the enemy? Or do you want to show up for battle and the enemy is not there? You're like, thank God, I got the thawab, I didn't have to fight. You should be happy that you got the reward and more reward because of the sacrifice. But that's the ego speaking. And then sometimes people will complain, they didn't do as good a job. I could have given a better speech. I could have done a better recitation. I could have done a better noha. You think so? Because you think that you're sitting next to Allah? This person deserves a 9.5. They did a good job. That person? What do I know of what is going to be accepted by Allah? So, to make a long story short, that is the focus. If we can conceptually remember that my job is to prepare, not to express, and not to demand a certain manner of performing. I don't come to Imam Mahdi, inshallah may he reappear tomorrow, and say, this is my resume. And then he comes, you know what? we're short-staffed in the kitchen. Can you go peel potatoes? And I say, I have a PhD. And he said, no, I need people to peel potatoes. That's what I need. And I said, I'm going to find another imam. That's how many of us will be. And I'm speaking only of myself, because that's how I am right now. If there is a children's class, and there's nobody to teach it and I need to teach it, I feel like my energy is being wasted, my knowledge is being wasted. Now, as a community, it doesn't say a good thing. If our physicians are doing nurses' work and there's nobody to do a physician's work, you need a nurse to do a nurse's work, a physician to do a physician's work, an administrator to do an administrator's work. That's a societal solution. But I, as an individual, should not feel that I'm going to tell Imam Mahdi, or I'm going to tell my masajid, or I'm going to tell my centers that, this is beneath me. So, now, how can we solve that problem? Well, we can model. Have your physicians be the ones serving the food. Have your ulama be the ones that are stepping forward to serve where it is needed. That model, I'm not saying you impose that on somebody else and say, well, you look like a wealthy person, why don't you go and clean the toilets to set a good model? Now, if I can do that myself, then I be the model. I don't tell an alim or another person that you need to do this. But that community will thrive because it is showing selflessness in our relationships. At a town hall or what do they call them? The general body meeting or Sunday school, where you see that people come and say, what can I do? Where can I serve? Where can I be useful? And Sheikh Nabil can probably tell you, this is the spirit that exists within the Hawza. You'll sometimes find teachers, who can teach Bahthul Kharij. And they're very happy teaching just introductory students basic grammar. After 40 years, sometimes 50 years of teaching advanced texts, it's boring. But they're as at peace as if they're just discovering it for the first time. Why? Because they feel like they're planting a seed. They feel like they're doing something for Imam Mahdi. So model that, and then try to associate with people who have that selflessness. When you associate with those people, then you will learn. And if you say, I don't have anybody like that in my life, but you think that Prophet Muhammad is not in your life? You think that Imam Ali is not in your life? You think that Fatima Zahra alayhi salam is not in your life? You're living with them, they're living with you. And so if I don't have that Sheikh Bahjat next door to me, then you have the teacher of Sheikh Bahjat present in your lives. That was a little bit of a longer answer. I apologize for it. But inshallah, please share your...
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I love that we have the examples of the Ahlul Bayt always surrounding us, and Sheikh Naveed also talked about the big brother or a big sister program, and so having that somebody with us that we can look up to is very important. But if you don't have that with you, you can always look at the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, and that really guides us and brings us back to, it helps us find the answers that we're looking for. So kind of just building off of that, I wanted to talk about jealousy and hasad, and once again, connecting that back to the heart and mind, and then we'll move forward to the next section, maybe take some questions from the crowd. But sometimes jealousy or hasad can lead us to having low self-worth. So can you please talk about the different levels of hasad and the dangers of that, and just the importance of each human's self-worth in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
So, let's take a look at what's happening when someone becomes jealous. What's going on? In reality, and one explanation that I really like about it is that a person who experiences jealousy experiences this because they assume that the object of their jealousy is in some way or fashion the impediment to their success. Okay? So it's almost like in the back of their mind, they're feeling like this person took something that they shouldn't have. Either I should have it or what, but I don't want that person to have it. And then that feeling, as it mentions in the hadith, it makes the heart grow dark. Is among the things that makes the heart grow dark is this jealousy. So in that sense, when we know where it comes from, one way that we can help ourselves in a faith-based approach is to realize that the sustenance in reality comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He portions it according to His economy. And our job is to make an effort to actualize that sustenance. But in reality, it's basically what I'm trying to say is there's enough to go around. So what happens when someone looks at something else and they feel like they should have had it? Or why aren't they that way? And I'm going to end on this. It could be in some way that that person in that instance has lost the sense of their life, their journey, what has meaning to them. And this is not just saying that, okay, if you just, the train's on the way, subhanAllah. So, mashallah. Like that's a way to grab attention. That one, the duck one, my mom uses the duck one when she wants to remember something really important. Anyway, so we have to realize that our existence is not to try to acquire these things, and they don't give us meaning. And I'm not just saying this from a religious perspective. There's a type of approach known as an existential approach. And while materialists derive different meanings from this, but the essence is the same, is where do you draw meaning from? And the Muslim has to realize that they need to draw their meaning from more than just their physical or material representation. That they have a spiritual, they have a non-material, they have a life beyond death, after death in this world. And the things that matter, in essence, are those things that we can carry with us over, and those are only our actions, not our possessions. And sometimes grounding ourselves with that really helps us pacify some of that jealousy. And I pass the microphone to Sayyid, inshallah.
That's a comprehensive answer. I'll just give an example. I apologize for being on my phone. I was checking the name. There is a scholar mentioned by Sayyid Zanjani in one of his books, Muhammad Ali Urdubadi. You've never heard of him. But he was known for, well, he's Persian, he was known for being a very accomplished scholar of Arabic rhetoric and writing. And there's a number of books. One is Sheikh Abbas Qummi, the same person who was the author of Mafatihul Jinan. He has a book called Al-Kuna wal-Alqab, kind of a biographical dictionary, let's say. Because he was a native Persian speaker, his Arabic, was probably like if I were to write a book in Persian or in Urdu or Arabic, it wouldn't be, without grammatical mistakes. So he edited that book and put a condition that my name should not be mentioned. And all of you are familiar with the book Al-Ghadir. It's an encyclopedia about the wasaya and wilaya of Amir al-Mu'mineen by Allama Amini. We all know Allama Amini. That book also, it's a masterpiece of Arabic literature. In addition to being scholarship, it was also edited by Muhammad Ali Urdubadi. And again, I want to be anonymous. This book was the effort of Allama Amini. He put his heart and soul and his life into it. It should have his name, not that kind of, as I said, we have so many examples in the Hawza where this kind of, here you would have a lawsuit. You'd have an argument about royalties. Even just in our religious, we take credit for things that we are partially involved in. But, in addition to the points raised by Sheikh Naveed, in general, I think knowing about these examples, modeling and learning and remembering those examples, and these are all learned from Ahlul Bayt. They are a means to inoculate our heart against jealousy. And, because we are dealing with a time when we should remember shuhada, what is the spirit that allows a 20-year-old to say that I'm willing to go and offer my life? I have everything to look forward to, other than a realization that you're not competing with other people. If you're competing, فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ, it is vying and not competing with each other to serve Allah. And so remembering shuhada, their lives, their names, their stories, that's probably one of the best ways to cure your heart from jealousy and all of the other related illnesses. And that's perhaps one of the aspects why it is said that to cure your heart from hypocrisy, and hypocrisy is closely related to envy, is to recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Because in remembering Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, you remember faith, you remember humility, you remember shahada, all of those values that cure you from spiritual ills, they are summarized in one salawat. So that's just one part. Then you can take that beam of light, and like a prism, you can separate the different colors of that light, and each of those colors is beautiful as well. And remembering shuhada, remembering the names of those people who were so selfless that they would say, I am going to contribute to this project, but I want to be anonymous. And so now, when I hear somebody say something nice in a speech, I feel that desire to yell out, I thought of that before they did. I've been saying that for years. And that is, the weakness of my heart. Maybe I'm jealous. How come they're getting the credit for something that I should have put out a video on this before? But and same thing now with philanthropy. It's a very unfortunate thing nowadays. We have, plaques, and it's coming even into our Islamic culture. When did that ever exist? Where we had named donors and even, Fatiha and things. I know it's a custom, nothing wrong with it. But if it's for somebody else, great. But if it's for yourself, then remember that your only obligation to have your name present is to the extent that it can serve as an example and as a role model, and even then try to do double anonymously what you do in public. That's an example that we have, these fara'id and nawafil from our Prophet. So the point is that learn from those models and then fight against those aspects of our modern culture that make it more difficult to be sincere. Because if we live in a philanthropic culture, an academic culture, a professional culture, where you have to put yourself out there. You have to go back to an earlier question, beautify your physical picture and pad your resume and everything in order to be able to get ahead. And then how are you going to not be jealous? But there is another world. And many people don't have access to that world. You do. In your center, in your majalis, in your values, and even in your neighbors and your fellow believers. Tap into that world. Because you can't escape from the rat race that exists in our general society, but you don't have to go to the mountains to escape from it. Our faith and all of the institutions associated with our faith, they are our safe haven. And let's not let those values that come from another worldview pollute our institutions. Sometimes they do. Let's try to fight that so that we can preserve the purity And we learn not to be jealous, and we learn not to have the other spiritual ills, because we have preserved that beauty within our religious institutions.
Fantastic, thank you. My mind is going into like a million different places right now because I'm not just a moderator today, but I'm also an attendee. So I'm trying to like compartmentalize and like take mental notes right now from all of the points that you guys have been giving, and alhamdulillah, it's very beneficial. I want to give the crowd a little bit of time. We have about like less than 20 minutes to wrap up the program. So I want to give people in the crowd a chance to also ask some questions that they have. I'm going to actually start as the crowd. And then if everybody's okay, then if anybody has questions, we can go around with the mic and ask some questions. We have parental screen controls and locks and things like that. And Sayyid Sulaiman, you mentioned not to instill fear in the children rather than the love of the religion and give them a sense of belonging. And you mentioned a Big Brother program, Boy Scouts, things like that. As a parent of 3 boys, how do I raise them in such a way that when these parental controls are gone, we can't hover over them? Or not that I'm a helicopter mom, my husband might think I am, but how do I know that the boys will go out into college and be able to self-regulate? Or what tools can I give them to help them self-regulate around technology, media usage, and such?
So, from what I understood from the question, this is more a question about technique.
Yes.
Okay. So,
whether it's like an ayah that
yeah.
they can read or...
So, the more Quran they have in their life, the more likely it will be for them to avoid attraction to those things that you're worried about through technology. Okay? So having that kind of tarbiyah of getting them to be in tune with their religion, practicing it, having that there as a way to sort of hold them back. It grounds you, religion grounds you. And that's one thing they say in some of these Western ideas and therapies, is they actually say, religion is actually good. Not because there's any truth to it, and not because it takes you to heaven, but because it makes you, for example, a good citizen. Or it gives you something to believe in so you can live out your days. They'll even encourage it just for that. We obviously know that there's more to religion than that, but they'll accept it in so much as they know that it is a healthy, I guess you could say, force field in a sense for a human being. And it guards them against some things like nihilism, or that idea or that feeling that there's no point to life. And a lot of people in Western societies, they have this problem right now where they have a deep sense of a lack of purpose. Especially men in their mid to late 30s have this problem. And it's actually quite prevalent. And it's a big issue in their society. So anyway, what we need to really focus on is, what are we dealing with? What are we up against? Once I know what I'm actually up against, I'll know in what ways or in what degree I need to be very nervous about something. So for example, if I know that the algorithm is meant to take me towards certain attractions, right? Then I know that, okay, I need the tools to regulate that app. So total, banning of the use may create that backlash that Sayyid Sulaiman talked about, where it would create a sense of content. But you also want to have regulation as much as you can through certain age ranges. But, at each developmental cycle, and there's different developmental cycles, and Islam, fascinatingly, very similar to Erickson's developmental cycles, where it goes every 7 years. And that's research you guys can do. Just check the development, Erickson's stages of development. And you can, as you notice, from adolescence to young adulthood, that sense of being able to decide who they are, that increases. So what do they fall back on? They fall back on the things they learned in their early years. And it's really fascinating. I think it's Aristotle who has this statement, or it's Plato. He says, have you heard this one? It says, give me the child from 0 to 7 and I'll show you the adult. And it's really fascinating. It was Aristotle, yeah. So that's really fascinating. What does that mean? That means that the skills that are learned from 0 to 7, they provide a lot of, if not all of, the pre-programming that we have, and it dictates the way we react to things. So that's what you want to do. You want to start early. Let's say someone wasn't cautious and careful when the children were early, and they woke up to this later on. That's okay too. That is, in young adolescence, there's still time to shape that relationship through authority. The older they get, the more convincing you have to be. And that, again, requires the knowledge of what you're up against. So to explain to a 17-year-old that, look, if you go down this rabbit hole of getting fixated on these images, and there's so many images, and there's so many different types, and they change so frequently, a human being, especially a male human being, is not supposed to be able to see all of that content in his lifetime. You know, that's unnatural. So what it does, and this is what you can do to help educate them on this, is to let them know, if they're a bit older, that when they're bombarded with all of these images, it creates a sense of normalcy in their mind, and it prevents them from being able to function normally in other aspects of their life. And you know, when you drive that point home, the older child becomes more aware and in tune with that. But you know, with the younger children, you want to have a very structured approach. Give them the tools, teach them how to have restraint, teach them how to have screen time, teach them how to have, let them know that there are these boundaries. And I can tell you very easily, like, this is such a big problem right now. Like, there's like all these kids from 6 to 9 years old that, you know, there's nothing wrong with them physically. They are completely biologically healthy, but they just can't sit still for over 5 minutes. And, you know, and I've seen this myself, like there's a girl, she's completely sweet. There's nothing wrong with her. But all of a sudden, she'll just get up and start yelling. And when you investigate these cases, you come to realize that, oh, subhanAllah, you know, I'm not going to say just Roblox is bad, but most of the kids that are having problems, I've seen one of the common denominators is Roblox. And at first I thought Roblox was like, you know, pretty harmless, and it's just these like blocks or boxy characters or whatnot, not to be confused with Minecraft. I know they're different, but not to be confused with that. But I realized that there are images and themes in Roblox that no child should ever see, like these demons they have in that game, or the blood and the gore and the whatnot, you know, the enemies or the monsters that run after you. You know, what does that do to a child's sense of calm and ease. It obviously completely destroys it. So they have that hayajan, they have that excitement in them all the time, and it's not natural. It's almost like it's been created in them, and they have to just get it out. So anyway, it's that important to start young.
I think a lot of that was what initiated this workshop today, was all of the things that are available to younger kids, and my kids are under 7, and so seeing that was really concerning to me. And I don't want today to be you to feel judged if any of your kids do this, or if you do fall into any of this. I don't want this to be a judgment zone. It's more of a reflective, like reflect on what our consumption is and go back home, and inshallah with the tools that Sheikh and Sayyid gave us, we can go back home and make these and implement these changes in our lives. So we have about less than 10 minutes, so if we want to do rapid fire, or if we want to do a lengthier question, the crowd is open to ask their questions. And then inshallah, we do plan to have a part 2 to this workshop, speaking more about the science of the brain, the dopamine, and everything that happens in the addictive cycles, and how to break those. So that will be part 2 within the next month, inshallah. But if somebody has a question, feel free to please raise your hand. We can bring a mic around. Shabir, you have a question? Yeah? Oh, you have a mic. Okay, fantastic. Does anybody from the crowd have a question?
Assalamu alaikum. So with the emergence of AI and how advanced it has become, if AI, if it becomes so advanced that it perfectly mimics a human being, has thoughts, ideas, emotions, would deleting its code be a form of zulm?
Got a keyboard warrior.
That's an interesting question. We as human beings have a tendency to humanize, and see patterns that may or may not represent reality. But when it comes to AI, what would be dhulm is to go and to utilize something in a way that Allah has not decreed. So to destroy infrastructure or to use infrastructure in a haram manner would be dhulm. But to perhaps restrict the use of AI for a legitimate reason, protection of kids, or even to delete. It's not deleting consciousness, and it is not deleting something that is a living being or a human being. It's something that we should actually talk about. Just like, many people, I know their discussion is, why is there a fatwa banning nuclear weapons? Doesn't make sense. Right? Especially if you're Pakistani and you're like, well, no, wait a minute, we have the Islamic, we need it to protect ourselves against a threat. But in general, that the point is not, whether you should delete code for AI or whether you should or should not develop nuclear weapons. It is that you should have a pause before the development and before the deployment of any form of technology. And if it is already existing, sometimes people think you can't put the genie back in the bottle. But it is possible to imagine a new world. And it is possible to create a new world. And the difficulty is one of willpower and faith. So again, this is just for illustrative purposes and no other purpose. Which is a stronger country, Iran or Russia, in terms of military? Well, in terms of the superficial military, Russia. It's been confronted by NATO and Europe and America for 4 years now, and it hasn't been able to make progress. Again, and I'm not making a statement other than just an analytical statement at this point. But why was the outcome in less than a month different here than in 4 years? Not because you had better weapons or even necessarily more experienced generals, although you did, but that's not the point. That's not the key difference. It's, the West would call it the power of imagination. It's not even imagination. It is faith. And so always have that kind of a question.
Thank you so
AI
much.
is not, AI is not inevitable. Dial it back if you need to. Think about where and whether and when we should utilize it and in what way.
Thank you, Jazakallah.
Dr. Abbas.
Thank you. Just a question and also observation. Alhamdulillah, we organize very beautiful programs at Idara for our youth, but sometimes my observation, a lot of young teenagers, the parents are sitting in the majlis or any lecture, but the young teenager, they give them phone and they're sitting outside. So how we can help those parents or also our young teenagers, because those programs are basically designed to help them to learn something. As a parent, when I myself benefit by my 10, 12, 13 years old sitting outside and playing game, so how we can address that? Jazakallah.
So I have less experience as a parent compared to Sayyid, so he would have a better opinion on this than me, but just to add something from my experience working with the youth is that you need to build them into majlis attendees. And how do you do that is that you step by step sort of initiate them. And this was something that's fascinating about many world religions and cultures. And there's a book by this guy, his name is Joseph Campbell, I think, if I'm not mistaken. It's called A Hero with 1,000 Faces or 1,000 Masks. And he says that, you know, he was an anthropologist from Colombia, and he studied different cultures. And he said that I noticed in the different cultures, there is a sense of a spirituality that is attained through different steps of initiation. Okay? And, you know, in Islam, some of these things are present. I'm not saying that, you know, Islam is like a folk religion, but, you know, a human being operates a certain way. And as a result of that, you'll find in different areas, in different locations, people tend to converge on a common practice because it has that effect. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say this, that when we recognize where they are in their development, in their stage, that's when we are able to strategize better what to do. So that teenager, they need to be normalized to attending the masjid and becoming friends and acquaintances with people who go to the masjid so they can build a common bond with those attendees. That's just one perspective. There's a lot of different perspectives on this, but that's something I found to be very effective. So what does that mean? That means that the youth groups need to be very active, and there needs to be programs specifically for those youth groups. And I see Brother Rizwani in the back over there, and that's one of his initiatives, mashallah, these inter-masjid youth hikes, these different bonfires. These programs, they normalize the attendance. And once the attendance is normalized, then I'm going to put it in these words, indoctrination can begin. Okay? Because when you sort of ease that conscious mind that someone has, that, you know, that defense or that feeling of, okay, I need to think about this, that is eased through a person's emotional attachment to something. That is eased through a person's sense of safety with something. So the more I feel like the masjid's fun or it serves me, or the more I feel like, you know, I'm used to going to the masjid, then the rituals attached to that feel more natural to me. So that's just one perspective, inshallah.
Sorry, I actually wanted to chime in. I think Idara does a fantastic job. We have a program from birth to 3 years old, which is Mommy and Me. We have Idara Kids, which serves from 4 to almost 9, and then the youth group has their age group, and then there's programming for the adults. And I think it's very important for everybody to bring their children starting from a young age. That way those kids do have a sense of belonging and a good, strong friend circle, because that really is what brings the kids to the community, to the center, to enjoy themselves. If it's just sitting around and being in Idara, they really do enjoy it when it's with their peers. And I think Idara does a fantastic job serving those age groups. It's just a matter of bringing them. We are at 5 o'clock now, a little past. So if anybody has one last question, we can take one last question and then wrap up. Sister.
We can hear you if you want to just.
So this is I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. Thank you. So especially in the DMV, we have a very highly politicized community. I would say just in our proximity to Washington, D.C., a very educated community. What a lot of us who grew up in this community have seen is both good in terms of people who sincerely will volunteer for things in community, and we've also seen people who maybe practice some of that, like Zahar Sazi, or like, the show of being pious. So the question to you all is, why do you think we don't have more mentors who have some of this mature real-life perspective and experience with the greater, larger world, and who can have real value to lend to their peers and also younger people about how to integrate their Islamic values with living everyday physical life here in the United States?
That's not a simple question and a short question, but because we are out of time, I'll just say maybe one sentence, and then Sheikh Naveed can add. We create the world that incubates certain values. So I remember there was a time when, before the financial crisis in 2008, I was reading an article that there's so much money to be made in finance that it's sucking good college students away from STEM and from other fields, and they're going into finance, which, in the end is, I don't want to say it's not part of the productive economy, but perhaps it's certainly not the only part of a productive economy. But if your incentives, whether financial or whether in terms of what we recognize and we honor, are rooted in that direction, then of course more people are going to go in that direction. And so what do we celebrate? What do we financially reward? And specifically, when you're talking about this region, maybe it's out of balance in the whole country and the whole world sometimes, but certainly in this region, there's certain things that are celebrated, that are rewarded, that are recognized, that are defined as success, which are not in line with our values. So have we created an alternative form of recognition or reward to incubate the values that we want? So that's, again, I wanted to just say one sentence, a little more than one sentence, but hopefully not too much more. That would, I think, be what we need to think about and, and work on further.
Okay, thank you. And I think look out for part 2, inshallah. Share with your friends, because I think, as Sayyid has said, when we have a common goal, that's what brings everybody together. So our conscious consumption, our digital well-being, we'll be able to apply that to our families, to our kids, to elders in the community, and strengthen ourselves as a community, inshallah. I'd like to call upon Brother Wasi Zadi to recite ziyarat, inshallah.
متوجه زيارة. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين وابن السيد الوصين. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء سيدتي نساء العالمين. السلام عليكم يا سائر الشهداء كربلاء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء. السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء. السلام عليك يا شمس الشموس. السلام عليك يا أنيس النفوس. السلام عليك يا مدفون بأرض طوس راضي بالقدر والقضاء علي بن موسى الرضا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولاي يا صاحب العصر والزمان. الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. السلام عليك يا قابة الإيمان وإمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك. السلام عليكم ورحمة